a whispered story of broken vows, and a ghostly presence that seems far too familiar. This is not just a drive, it's a descent into the shadows of his own sins. What happens when the weight of your past finally catches up to you? Stay with us because this tale will chill you to your core.
An ordinary man called Eric lived in a small, remote town in the United States. He was very unhappy with his life. It was like he was stuck in his own ego, and betrayal was a normal part of his day. His cheating caused his marriage to fall apart, which used to be full of hope and shared dream. In one particular evening, Eric left the house in a rage after yet another fight with his family. He was looking for comfort, but he wasn't sure where to find it because the silence of the argument was too much for him. He got in his car and drove down a country road while the full moon shone overhead. He hoped that the peace and quiet would help him see things more clearly. Along the empty road, the long shadows seemed to dance in the moonlight as the car cut through the night. The cool air that came in through his broken window held a chill that made him think of what he should have done. Eric was left to think bad things by himself. His wife and kids, whom he hadn't thought about in a long time, came flooding back to the top of his mind. He remembered the beautiful smile on his wife's face on their wedding day, the moment they promised to walk life's road together, and the pure joy of having their children. Every memory hurt his heart like a sharp shard because it reminded him of all the things he had given up for short-lived, meaningless joy. Among these reflections, Eric saw a person standing by the road in the distance. He got closer and saw that it was a woman dressed in all white, with skin as pale as the moonlight that was shining. She looked like she came out of the darkness, an ethereal presence that was both scary and alluring. Because he was worried about her safety, or maybe just interested, Eric slowed down and stopped a short distance away. He paused before going outside, and as he called out to her, his breath caught. The woman turned to face him as he got closer. Her face was sad, and her eyes were filled with sadness. She told him she needed a ride to a safe place because she had a terrible fight with her family. Eric was unsure. There was something off about her, but her beauty and weakness made him feel safe around her. He invited her into the car even though he knew it wasn't a good idea. But deep down, he wasn't really doing it out of kindness. There was a spark of selfishness in him, a need to fill the void in his soul. As soon as she got in, the air in the car seemed to change. The silence between them grew thick with an unspoken stress that Eric couldn't quite place. The woman started to tell her story as they drove. When she talked about a broken marriage and broken vows, her voice was soft but full of pain. Her husband was meant to keep her heart safe, but he broke it instead. Eric could not help but see parallels between her story and his own as she told it. The similarities could not be avoided. His deep-seated guilt came to the surface when she spoke, making him face the pain he had caused his wife and children. He had once imagined an ideal family life, but now the reality he had made was a terrible contrast to it. Eric felt more and more uneasy as the road got darker and windier. What a sad voice that woman had. It seemed like it got into the car itself. He felt pulled to her sadness, but he also wanted to turn away from the truths that she was making him face. It was as though her story was forcing him to relive his own guilt. But let me pause for a moment and ask you this. If you were Eric, faced with a chance to reflect on all your regrets, what would you do differently to escape the weight of your past mistake? Or maybe, have you ever felt like someone's story mirrored your own so perfectly that it forced you to confront something you'd rather forget? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your answers might just give someone else the courage to face their own truth. Eric felt a growing weight on his chest as she talked. He thought about the mental scars he had caused in his family, which were similar to the ones this woman had. When she finally told them the truth, the air became thick with tension. She talked about her own death and described the terrible betrayal that took her life. Because he was jealous, her husband killed her in cold blood. She said that now she was just a shadow, a ghost chained to the living world by her desire for justice. As Eric took a deep breath, the truth of what she said hit him hard. He found out too late that picking her up had put him in danger. Now the car seemed to move on its own, taking them further into the dark. Her presence began to change, first in a small way and then in a big way. What used to be sadness in her eyes turned into something much scarier. Eric's heart was racing as she changed the shape of her face, turning her once beautiful face into something horrible. It got very cold inside the car, and the shadows outside looked like they were pressing against the windows like they were alive. Eric's mind was racing, and his worries were getting worse. He tried to figure out what was going on, but the puzzle parts wouldn't fit together in a way that made sense. The woman, no, the thing, began to talk again. This time, Her voice wasn't soft, it was sharp and authoritative. She said he had betrayed his family and done the same bad things her husband had. She hit him hard with her words, and each one tore open a wound he had been trying to hide. His mind was filled with vivid images that wouldn't stop. He could see his wife's tears and the sadness on her face from being alone. He could hear his kids crying out for him. Their cries were full of pain and confusion. Each vision was like a knife, cutting his shame deeper into his heart. Eric's cries for help were not heard. The woman took pleasure in his pain and fed off of his sadness. She told him that he would experience the pain he had caused even after he died because of what he had done. As Eric's dreams got worse, his mind became even more disorganized. He could see both the present and the future. He saw his wife fighting to keep the family together and his kids growing up without a dad to guide them. Having failed hit him so hard that he was gasping for air. Even though Eric hadn't touched the brakes, the car stopped quickly. The world outside had changed. The road was gone, and in its place was a thick, strange fog. The woman walked out, but her shape was no longer identifiable. She looked like a ghost and was a primal force of anger and sadness. Eric tried to go after her, but his legs wouldn't move. During the fog, he was stuck in the car and could not move. Eric knew how bad his mistakes were right up until the very end. His family and himself had both been lied to by him. In exchange for meaningless distractions, he had given up the very things that gave his life purpose. He could hear the woman laughing as the fog enveloped him and pulled him into an endless void. His last thoughts were of his children and wife, of the love he had wasted and the chance to be forgiven that he would never find. The next morning, the car was found abandoned on a road that people in the area said was cursed. Eric was never seen again, but people in the town told stories about him. The stories about the white lady got stronger, and they started to include the sad story of a man who lost everything because of his own mistake. As long as people lived in the quiet town, she would always be there as a ghostly warning of what it costs to betray someone. Eric was caught in the grips of his fate. He cried out for forgiveness many times, but it wasn't enough to take away the weight of his sin. The white lady watched him. Her eyes were hollow but keen, and her ghostly presence never changed. Her ears had heard a million pleas from people who had been betrayed in the same way. Eric really felt bad about what he did, but it was too late. There was no turning back from what he did, and she was there to make sure that the lesson would not be forgotten. The space around Eric started to fall apart, and the fog got tighter, like a trap. He felt like the weight of his mistakes was crushing him and making it impossible for him to get away. He kept seeing pictures of his crying wife and kids, and the sounds of their cries for him got louder and more intense, like the pain he had caused was getting too much to handle. As the white lady walked closer, he gasped for air and clutched his chest. Her shape changed from beautiful to scary. She spoke without words. Her presence told us an old truth. The decisions we make us who we are, and betrayal costs a lot. As Eric's body shook, his memories took over. He saw all the times in his life when he had turned away from friends, family, and duty. He saw how every lie made his wife lose hope and every silence made his kids lose trust. He saw the empty person he had turned into, whose selfish wants had hurt the people who had once looked to him as a rock and a safe place to land. The unbearable pain was a mirror of the suffering he had caused other people. The white lady reached out a ghostly hand, and Eric felt the cold grip of what was going to happen. His vision got fuzzy as the things around him started to fade away. The last thing he saw was her face, which was a weird mix of sadness and anger. It was like she was grieving not only her own death but also the soul she had to take. The ghostly light around her briefly flared, showing shadowy figures behind her. These were other victims, trapped in their own eternal despair, their faces scrunched in silent scream. Eric knew at that moment that his life was not unique. It was part of a tapestry of suffering that had been made for hundreds of years. His heart stopped beating, and Eric's body fell into the endless void, being eaten by the same darkness that had killed so many others before him. But his awareness lingered, not in peace but in pain. He became part of the white lady's world and will haunt the edges of her path as an empty ghost. There were sad whispers and his cries added to them. They were regretful sounds that would never reach the living. Eric's car was alone and still on the side of the road when the first light of dawn hit the quiet town. Inside, his lifeless body was slouched over the driving wheel, and he had a very sad look on his face. There were no signs of fighting or clues about what had happened, but people who knew the story knew what had happened. He was taken by the white lady, who said it was to scare other people. People all over town were shocked when Eric died. His wife and kids were so hurt that they became live examples of the pain that betrayal can cause. Their pain showed how fragile love is and how deep wounds can be when trust is broken. His wife, who used to be a source of hope and positivity, turned inward because she felt weighed down by unanswered questions and the pain of his choices. His kids, who were too young to fully understand what had happened, carried the scars of his departure into their own lives. They laughed less and were happier. People in the town talked about the White Lady's lesson, which was a scary reminder of what happens when you leave the people who mean the most. Her story was told from one family to the next to both scare and warn. Parents would talk to their kids about Eric and what happened to him. They would tell their kids to love the people they care about and keep their promises. The road where Eric died became a scary place to visit and think about life. As people drove by, they would slow down and tightly grip their steering wheels while saying quiet prayers. Some people would leave flowers, coins, or scribbled notes of apology by the side of the road in an effort to calm the spirit. As word spread about the White Lady, her story became more than just one of revenge. It also told painful fact. She wasn't just a ghost of anger, she was a force that showed how terrible it is to make selfish decisions. Every victim she said she had was turned into a story, a warning tale that became part of the town's history. She became more than just a figure on the road over time. People started saying that they saw a woman in white in their dream. Her hollow eyes stared deep into their hearts, making them face their own deepest regrets and betrayal. Eric's story was told again, but this time it wasn't as a happy ending but as a sad warning. His short life, which was cut short by his own mistakes, showed what can happen when love and loyalty are broken. The White Lady didn't give her victims second chances. They were stuck in the mistakes that got them to her for all time. Eric died and joined the many others who had been killed by her curse. His voice was lost in the endless lamentation that surrounded her. He became a part of the story, a shadow that moved around the edges of her domain, a whisper on the wind that made visitors feel cold to the core. The story lived on, and the White Lady's shadow hung over the town all the time. The full moon lit up the empty roads where she walked, waiting for the next person brave enough to follow the same path of betrayal. With each victim she claimed, her warning got stronger, resonating through the night. Love and loyalty are holy, and those who break them will pay the highest price. Her story was more than just fairy tale. It became a part of the town's culture and brought people together. People would be more serious about their vows, and selfish people would think twice before breaking them. The White Lady's curse was terrible, but she also gave us a strange gift, a warning that love, no matter how weak or short-lived, is the only thing that can stop the darkness. The White Lady's curse lingers, but you've only scratched the surface of her vengeance. Tap here to see how her next victim faced the terror, and why no one escapes her wrath.